When did a simple date turn into a plot twist worthy of a courtroom drama? Story 1. Met a woman on Bumble who seemed chill, into hiking, books, and true crime podcasts. We met at a cozy cafe for our first date. Everything was going great until a guy barged in, pointed at her, and shouted, "You said you were at your mom's." Turns out she was married. The guy was her husband. She hadn't just lied to him. She'd told me she was divorced. I backed away slowly, thinking this was peak awkward, but then he pulled out his phone, started recording, and said, "Thanks, bro. That's all I needed." She violated our prenup. She lunged for the phone. They screamed at each other, and the manager had to call the cops. The kicker? Her husband sent me a thank you email 2 weeks later with a screenshot. She owed him $75,000 for breaching the prenup clause about infidelity. All I did was order coffee and get caught in legal warfare. Story 2. First date at a bar downtown. She was smart, funny, dressed like she had her life together. We clicked instantly. Halfway through our drinks, she excused herself to the bathroom. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Then I got a tap on my shoulder from a man in plain clothes flashing a badge. Apparently, she was a suspect in a fraud case involving stolen credit cards and had been under surveillance for weeks. The bar staff had flagged her card as suspicious, which tipped off the feds. I sat there stunned as they arrested her right outside the women's restroom. I had to answer questions for an hour, show texts, even my Tinder messages with her. The whole thing felt like I was unknowingly part of a sting operation. They let me go and I never heard from her again, unless you count seeing her mugshot in the news 2 days later. Story 3. We went to a sushi place. Low-key, nice conversation. But she kept checking her phone like she was expecting something. Finally, she said, "Sorry, this is going to sound crazy, but my ex is stalking me. If he shows up, just don't say anything." I laughed nervously. Thought she was exaggerating. Then, boom, the front door of the restaurant bursts open. A dude with a GoPro on his head walks in, shouting, "Found you! Cheating again?" He marches over, still recording, screaming about betrayal. She stands up and slaps him so hard his camera flies off. Turns out they're going through a messy custody battle, and she was trying to prove he was unstable. The guy ended up getting arrested. I had to give a statement. She thanked me for witnessing the meltdown and said I helped her case. She also tried to set up a second date. Politely declined. I don't do second dates that require legal counsel. Story: We had a simple dinner date at an Italian place. She was cool. Conversation was flowing, and we ended the night with a walk. Thought that was it. Then, the next day, I get a subpoena. Apparently, she was using me as an alibi. Her ex was accusing her of vandalizing his car that same night. She told the cops she was on a date with me, which was true, but didn't mention she left for a phone call for 30 minutes near the end. I gave my honest timeline. Later found out she did key his car, and my vague recollection of the time ended up causing a delay in the case. Her lawyer even tried to twist my words in court to make it sound like she couldn't have left the area. Moral of the story? Always keep receipts, and avoid anyone who describes their ex as crazy in the first 10 minutes. Story 5. I met this girl at a trivia night. We hit it off, had great banter, and set a lunch date for the weekend. Things started weird when she showed up late, looked flustered, and ordered 2 shots before the appetizers. Midway through the date, 2 suited guys walk into the restaurant, scan the room, and walk straight to our table. One says, "Miss Carter, you've been served," and drops a thick manila envelope in front of her. She goes white, then starts laughing. Turns out, her own family was suing her over some inheritance issue. She said, "This has been coming for months," and opened the envelope right there next to the Caesar salad. She proceeded to explain the lawsuit like it was a Netflix docuseries, unfazed. Then she looks up and says, "Sorry, that probably killed the vibe." I told her honestly, I've never been on a date that came with a side of civil litigation. We actually ended up going on 3 more dates. Girl knew how to keep things interesting. Story 6. I matched with a guy on Hinge. He seemed pretty normal. Worked in finance, lived nearby, loved dogs. We met for dinner at a trendy taco place. First hour? Flirty, casual, fun. Then he excuses himself to the bathroom and doesn't come back. I'm thinking maybe he ghosted mid-date. Rude, but whatever. I go to pay the bill. Turns out he'd already covered it. Confused, I walk outside and see him in handcuffs, pressed against a cop car. Apparently, he was not in finance. He was under investigation for embezzling nearly $200,000 from a company he worked at 2 jobs ago. He'd been using fake names on dating apps and got recognized by someone at the bar who tipped off the police. The next day, I had a detective call me to confirm his alias. I didn't even know his real name until the article dropped 3 days later. And the wildest part? He was trying to lay low by dating and going out normally. Bro used me as part of his cover story. Story 7. We were 2 months into dating. Not a first date, but still in that sweet spot of everything's great. He invited me to his friend's engagement party. Said it would be casual and fun. We show up, and immediately I can feel the tension in the air. Turns out the bride-to-be is his ex. Not just an ex. His ex-fiancé. The guy she was now engaged to? His former best friend. Drama level? Off the charts. Her parents clearly still liked my boyfriend. Her dad greeted him with a, "Good to see you, son," while side-eyeing the current groom. I wanted to evaporate. Then, mid-toast, the groom slams his glass down and says, "You gonna tell everyone the truth or should I?" I am not kidding. This man pulled up texts between my boyfriend and his fiancée from the week before. They'd been talking. A lot. More than friendly closure kind of talking. Things devolved into shouting. The bride ran out crying, and I had to Uber myself home because my boyfriend was too busy arguing in the backyard with the guy he called his brother. I later found out the wedding was postponed. And me? I postponed that relationship permanently. Story 8. Went on a first date with a woman I met through friends. She suggested an escape room. Cool, quirky idea, I thought. Turns out it was a test. Halfway through the puzzle, I notice she's weirdly watching how I react under pressure, like she's analyzing. She starts asking strange questions like, if you found out your partner was hiding something illegal, what would you do? I laugh, thinking she's joking. She isn't. Then she admits she works as a defense attorney and often screens potential partners to see if they'd be liabilities in a legal crisis. I thought it was kind of intense but intriguing. Then she gets a call, steps out, and when she comes back, her face is pale. "Sorry," she says. "We have to cut this short. One of my clients just skipped bail." The next day, I get a call. She asks if I remember anyone following us to the escape room, because her client was a PI's former associate and might be tailing her. I didn't sign up to be a witness in a high-stakes legal chess game on date 1. We never met again, but part of me still wonders if she escaped the case, or if she just added me to her mental case file. Story 9. Dinner at a steakhouse. Guy was older, charming, said he was semi-retired from real estate. Halfway through dessert, he casually mentions being in the middle of a lawsuit with his brother over some silly inheritance issue. Cool, rich people problems. I brush it off, until a woman walks into the restaurant, straight up to our table and slaps him with a legal envelope. "You've been avoiding service for months," she hisses. Turns out this was no silly inheritance case. He was accused of forging documents to try and seize his deceased mother's estate, cutting out multiple siblings. The woman who served him? His own sister. He just sat there and calmly finished his creme brulee while flipping through the papers, looked at me and said, "Well, that escalated. Want to split an Uber?" "Yeah, no thanks." Story 10. I was set up on a date by my cousin with this guy she said was a sweetheart with a law degree and no drama. We met for brunch. Everything was normal until he mentioned he used to be a lawyer. I asked why he quit. He got quiet and said, "Let's just say I don't trust the justice system anymore." That should have been a red flag, but curiosity got the better of. I pushed, and finally he confessed. He had been disbarred. Why? Because he forged a signature on a settlement agreement to save a client time. Client found out, filed a complaint. He was charged with professional misconduct, fined, and banned from practicing. The date ended with him pulling out a folder and asking if I wanted to read his 12-page appeal letter to the Bar Association. Imagine sipping a mimosa while a man reads you legal documentation as if he's pitching a screenplay. Nice guy, decent pancakes, but I was not about to become his redemption arc. Story 11. He was hot. Like, movie villain, you low-key root for hot. We matched on a Friday, and by Sunday we were clinking glasses at a rooftop bar. He was smooth, attentive, mysterious in that don't ask too much kind of way. We're mid-convo about travel when 2 plainclothes officers walk up and ask him to step aside. He kisses me on the cheek, stands up calmly, and goes with them. I'm stunned. I try to follow but get gently blocked. A few minutes later, the bartender tells me he's been under federal investigation for wire fraud. Apparently ran a Ponzi scheme involving crypto investments. The next morning, my phone blows up with texts. Not from him, but his lawyer. His actual licensed attorney. Says my name was listed as someone he recently transferred funds to, which he had. He'd sent me $200 to cover dinner the day before. I had to provide bank records and a statement to the feds. I was shaking the whole time. He's now facing over 12 years. Me? I deleted Hinge and started rewatching Dateline to process the trauma. Story 12. We had a cute picnic in the park. She brought wine and sandwiches. I brought a Bluetooth speaker and my dog. It was light, romantic, and felt like something out of a rom-com. Then a random woman jogged by, stopped dead in her tracks, and screamed, "Are you serious, Laura?" Turns out, Laura was married. Not just married, actively in the middle of a messy divorce. The jogger? Her soon-to-be ex's sister, who recognized her. I awkwardly stood there, holding my dog's leash, as they yelled in front of the duck. Then the jogger started filming, shouting that she was going to show this to her brother to use in court. Laura whispered to me, "Don't worry, we're technically separate." I didn't reply. I just packed up debris and left. 2 weeks later, I get a Facebook message request from her husband asking if I'd testify. I declined and blocked everyone involved. Story 13. He picked me up in a vintage BMW, wore cologne that probably cost more than my rent. We had sushi, laughed about childhood trauma, shared dessert, and took a walk around a nearby lake. It was perfect. Until the flashing lights of police cruiser. 2 officers. One of them said, "Sir, please step away from the woman and place your hands where we can see them." I was frozen. Apparently the BMW was reported stolen from his ex, who also claimed he broke into her house to take it after she kicked him out. He swore up and down it was his car, that she was lying to screw him over. But the cops showed me the registration. It was in her name. I watched him get cuffed and put in the back of a squad car while I stood there holding a to-go box of mochi ice cream. The next day, he texted me from a different number. "Did you at least have a good night?" I never replied. But yeah, the sushi was excellent. Story 14. We went mini-golfing. Harmless fun, right? He was goofy, competitive, and shockingly good at hitting those weird little trick shot holes. Everything was going smoothly until he got a phone call and suddenly turned pale. He said, "I gotta go. Emergency." I offered to walk with him back to his car. As we approached the parking lot, 2 men in suits intercepted. They weren't cops. They were private investigators. Turns out he was being investigated in a custody battle, and his ex had hired them to follow it. She claimed he was neglecting his court-ordered parenting time. He had told the court he was working late. They asked me, "Can you confirm you've been here with him since 6 p.m.? And I just stood there, awkwardly holding a mini-golf scorecard, realizing I was now a witness in a custody deposition. He texted later, apologizing, and said he didn't mean to drag me into his mess. I believed him. But I never went on another date that required answering legal questions at the end. Story 15. This one's short and unreal. First date, coffee shop. He's cute, polite, a little nervous. Midway through our cappuccinos, he excuses himself to take a phone call outside. 2 minutes later, a woman walks up to my table and says, "Is this your first date with him?" I nod. She drops a restraining order on the table. "I've been trying to serve him for 3 weeks. Thanks for luring him out." She turns and walks away. I look outside. He sees her and bolts. Full sprint, through traffic. I never even learned his last name. But I guess I did my civic duty. Story 16. We were about 45 minutes into our first date at a tapas bar when he asked if I liked dogs. I said yes, and he smiled, relieved. Then he leaned in and whispered, "Good, because I might need your help getting mine back." I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. He explained that his ex had taken their dog during the breakup, even though the pup was registered under his name. He was strategically dating to build a case, trying to show he had a stable social environment and was mentally fit for custody. I was literally part of a legal exhibit. He asked if I'd be willing to talk to his lawyer after a few more dates to vouch for him. I politely laughed and changed the subject. But by dessert, he was showing me emails between him and his attorney, like I was supposed to give feedback. I wished him luck and ghosted. A week later, I saw a post on his Instagram. "Justice for Baxter. Court date set. Glad he loved his dog. Just wish I wasn't part of the opening arguments." Story 17. She was beautiful, confident, and had this mysterious energy that made everything feel like a movie. We met at a downtown bar with live jazz. She ordered a whiskey neat and talked like she owned the city. At one point, she excused herself to make a call. 15 minutes passed. Then a man walked in, scanned the room, and sat across from me. He said, "You don't know who she is, do you?" Apparently, she was currently out on bail after being arrested for identity theft. High-level stuff. Fake businesses, bank loans, stolen SSNs. He was a private investigator hired by one of her victims and had been tracking her movements. She had no idea he knew where she was. He asked me to text him if I ever heard from her again. By the time I stepped outside, she was gone. Left her drink, coat, and a note in my jacket pocket that just said, "It's not what it looks like. I promise." Never saw her again. But I still think about her, like a noir film I accidentally walked into. Story 18. We were a few dates in. He invited me to a small family cookout. Seemed like a big step, but I liked him, so I went. Everyone was lovely, until a woman showed up with 2 kids, screaming his name from the driveway. His mom went pale. His sister whispered, "Oh God, not again." Turns out the woman was his wife. Not ex, not soon-to-be, current, legally married wife. She had discovered our texts and showed up to confront him in front of everyone. And the kids? His. She handed me a folder. A folder. With screenshots of our chats, pictures of us together, and even a printed-out reservation from a hotel we'd stayed at. She said, "You might be subpoenaed," then stormed off. He tried to talk to me after, but I was already in the car. 2 weeks later, I got a formal notice from her divorce. I wasn't required to testify, but I was listed in the complaint as part of the pattern of deception. Lesson learned. If a man hesitates when you ask if he's single, run. Story 19. It was a wine tasting. Classy. Romantic. I thought it was going well until he casually mentioned that he couldn't go back to certain states. I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. He then proceeded to tell me that he was involved in a multi-state lawsuit regarding stolen antiquities, like ancient artifacts. Apparently, he used to help source rare items for private collectors, and a few turned out to be illegally acquired. I stared at him, swirling my Merlot, wondering if I was on a date or an episode of American Greed. Then, a couple 2 tables over started filming us with their phones. He looked over, sighed, and said, "I bet that's for the civil suit." He paid the bill in cash, tipped 40%, and told me I was a great listener. I haven't been to a museum since. Story 20. This one was quiet. Too quiet. Nice guy, sweet smile, polite. We went for ramen, and he barely said a word about himself, but asked a ton about me. I figured he was shy. 2 days later, I got a DM on Instagram from a woman with a private account. She asked, "Did you go on a date with his name on Thursday?" I confirmed. She said she was his fiancé, and he was currently facing a lawsuit for sexual harassment at his workplace, where she also worked. He had been suspended but never told her the full extent. She only found out after going through his emails. Apparently, he had a pattern of dating women right after serious legal trouble, like he was trying to reset his identity through relationships. She sent me the court paper. There was my name, mentioned briefly in a list of people he'd recently contacted. I didn't respond again. I don't know what happened to them. But I do know that sometimes quiet isn't mysterious. Sometimes it's just hiding something big. Story 21. We met at a bookstore and bonded over a shared love of murder mysteries. Our first date was at a little coffee shop where we talked for hours. He seemed like a dream, intelligent, attentive, and had this calm vibe. Then he casually said, "I'm not legally allowed to own a phone right now." I blinked. Thought it was a joke. Nope. He explained that he was under court-ordered digital restriction as part of a plea. He used to work in cybersecurity and was caught hacking into a former employer's system. I asked what he did with the information. He smiled and said, "Let's just say I knew things before they knew I knew them." We finished the date. I didn't ghost him. I just gently removed myself from the situation. You know you've dated too much when you have to Google someone's probation terms before texting back. Story 22. She was elegant, well-spoken, and carried herself like royalty. We went to a rooftop lounge and I was genuinely impressed. No red flags, until she ordered her third drink and started getting very talkative. She told me she used to be a corporate attorney, until she got disbarred. I asked why. She leaned in and whispered, "Contempt of court," but I swear I was provoked. Apparently, during a heated family estate trial, she lost her temper, insulted the judge, and refused to turn over sealed documents. The kicker? It wasn't her family's estate. She was representing a cousin while being secretly named in the will. Total conflict of interest. Barred for misconduct, fined, and now she works as a consultant. As we left, she smiled and said, "You're probably wondering if I'm still in legal trouble." I nodded. She shrugged and said, "Only civil, not criminal." Reassuring. Story 23. He brought me flowers on our first date. Actual bouquet. I was touched. We did dinner and a walk through a sculpture park. Sweetest night ever. Until 3 days later, I get a knock on my door from a woman holding a court summons. Apparently, he had listed my address as his current residence in a custody case. He needed to prove he had a stable home life and a domestic support system, so he used our one date to fake cohabitation. I was now officially a potential cohabitant in a custody evaluation. His ex's attorney subpoenaed our text thread, and I had to give a statement saying I had never even seen the inside of his house. He texted me later saying, "Sorry, I panicked and needed to look stable fast." That's not stability. That's perjury with extra steps. Story 24. We had just finished dinner and were sharing dessert when 2 women walked into the restaurant and made a beeline for our table. One pointed at him and said, "That's him." The other pulled out her phone and started filming. I thought maybe it was a prank. It wasn't. He stood up, tried to calm them down, but it escalated quick. One of them slapped him, not playfully, and yelled, "You stole my identity, you piece of—" Turns out he had been using one of the women's personal info to open credit cards. They met through a roommate situation gone wrong, and he had taken a photo of her ID by accident. She found out when she got denied for a mortgage, did some digging, and tracked him down. The other woman was a friend and backup witness. They served him right there at the table with civil paperwork. He turned to me and said, "This is a misunderstanding." Nope, this was theft. With tiramisu. Story 25. She and I went to a concert, small venue, indie band. We were dancing, laughing, vibing. At one point, she went to the bar and I noticed a guy across the room just staring. Not at us. Later, as we were leaving, that guy followed us out. He came up to me and said, "You're with her? Has she told you she's out on bail?" I laughed. She didn't. She confessed on the spot. She had been arrested 2 months earlier for assault, got into a brawl at a party, and someone ended up with a broken nose and a shattered phone. The guy following us? The victim's brother. He was trying to document her violating court restrictions. She wasn't supposed to be drinking in public or attending any events with rowdy environments. She looked at me, shrugged, and said, "Worth it for the music though, right?" I said nothing and walked to my car. My review of the concert? Pattu. Date? 1 star. Would not subpoena again. Story 26. He was charming, easygoing, and claimed to be a freelance consultant, which is usually vague. But hey, it was date 1. We met for drinks at a nice cocktail lounge. Smooth conversation, great energy, until 2 men in business attire approached our table and handed him a thick envelope. He froze. I asked what was going on. One of them said, "You've been served for breach of contract and intellectual property theft." Apparently, he had worked for a small tech startup and left, but not before copying proprietary code and trying to launch a nearly identical product under a new LLC. They found out, lawyered up, and had been tracking him for weeks. He muttered something about overreaction, stood up, and left. Later that night, I Googled him. He wasn't just in legal trouble. He was banned from 2 startup incubators and being investigated for corporate espionage. And here I thought the biggest red flag was him calling himself a visionary. Story 27. We were on our second date at a board game cafe when a woman walked in with a toddler and said, "There you are." I froze. He froze. The staff froze. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't angry. She was tired. She sat down at the table and said, "He didn't tell you, did he? He had a kid. And not only that, he was in the middle of a custody case and had been court-ordered to report all caregivers, babysitters, and anyone else involved in his child's life. He had left the toddler with a friend to sneak away for the date, violating terms of the temporary custody agreement. The woman was his ex, and she had tracked his location via a shared parenting app. She took the kid and left, saying, "Make better decisions next time." We never even finished the game. Pretty sure I was the unauthorized caregiver in a legal report by the end of the night. Story 28. She said she wanted a chill date. We went to a bowling alley, had some beers, made dumb jokes about our awful scores. Felt like something out of a 2000s rom-com. But right before our third game, she stepped outside to take a call and never came back. I waited 15 minutes. Then someone tapped me on the shoulder. A security guard. He asked if I was with the woman who came in wearing the red flannel. I said yes. He escorted me to the manager's office, where I saw police reviewing security footage. She had stolen a purse. Not just any purse. It belonged to the wife of a local judge who happened to be bowling with her family that same night. Apparently, my date had a long list of petty theft charges and was on probation. She targeted busy venues, distracted people, and snatched bags while pretending to be on a casual date. I spent the next hour being questioned. I was released, but not before hearing an officer say, "This guy's alibi is airtight. He bowls like a blindfolded raccoon." Fair, but rude. Story 29. He invited me to a quiet dinner at his apartment. Said he liked to cook and didn't like loud restaurants. Okay, cool. Intimate vibe, I thought. He made risotto. It was good. Wine, candles, jazz playing. And then he asked, "How do you feel about testifying in small claims court?" I laughed. He didn't. He wanted me to appear as a character witness against his ex-landlord, someone he was suing for emotional distress after a mold infestation. He planned the whole date to make sure I got a feel for what he was like as a tenant. I blinked. He said, "You don't have to lie. Just talk about how I seem clean, organized, mentally stable, that kind of thing." I excused myself to call an Uber. I took the stairs, walked 3 blocks, and blocked his number before I got home. I'm 90% sure he reused that same risotto pitch with someone else. Story 30. This was the date that started great and ended in literal sirens. She was bold and full of fire. We had dinner, drinks, then went to a jazz bar. She leaned into me and said, "You want to help me do something a little reckless?" I was buzzed, flirtatious, curious. I said, "Sure." We walked out and she pulled me into a quiet alley behind the bar. I thought we were about to make out. Instead, she pointed to a fire escape and said, "We're going up." Turns out the rooftop belonged to a restaurant that was currently involved in a lawsuit with her brother. Something about stolen recipes and breach of contract. She wanted to sneak up and take photos of her family's old kitchen setup to use in the trial. I had just agreed to become her accomplice. 2 minutes later, security showed up. Alarms blared. We jumped down a side stairwell and ran like we were in an action movie. I deleted her number and bought new shoes the next day. Those ones had rooftop grease and a little too much adrenaline soaked in. Story 31. We met at a trivia night and clicked immediate. First date was coffee and bagels on a sunny morning. Super normal. She was sarcastic, smart, into true crime. Honestly felt like we'd known each other for years. About a week later, we planned a second date at a bookstore cafe. But that morning, she texted me, "Hey, might be late. Minor legal thing. Don't freak out." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. She showed up 45 minutes late, slightly out of breath, holding a manila envelope. Turns out, she had just testified in a deposition for her own lawsuit. She had sued a former roommate who used her identity to open a credit card. But the kicker? The roommate was also suing her back for defamation, claiming the whole thing was an exaggerated revenge plot. She casually pulled out the transcript and showed me her statement. I'm sipping a mocha while she's explaining civil suits like it's Monday morning banter. We dated for a bit, but when someone lives life like a Netflix legal drama, it's hard to tell what's real and what's rehearsal. Story 32. He invited me to a wedding. Yep. Our first date was someone else's wedding. Said it was a +1 emergency and that we'd have fun. Okay, weird, but I went. The ceremony was beautiful, reception was fancy, and he seemed to know everyone. Until he didn't. By the second hour, I realized people were avoiding us. Then, during dinner, a guy walked up to our table and asked, "What are you doing here?" My date froze. The bride, from across the room, stared at him like she'd seen a ghost. Turns out he had dated the bride 2 years ago, and the breakup had ended with a restraining. He wasn't invited. He wasn't welcome. He had RSVP'd under someone else's name just to see if she was really over him. I was just the decoy. Security escorted us out. I apologized on the way out, even though I wasn't the one with a restraining order. He had the nerve to ask if I wanted to grab drinks after. Yeah, no. Story 33. We were 3 dates in, already hitting that comfortable stride. She invited me over for dinner at her apartment. Pasta, wine, candles, perfect. Halfway through dinner, there's a knock. 2 guys in suits. She opens the door, and they ask if they can come in. She sighs, looks at me, and says, "I told you this might happen." Turns out she was in the middle of a lawsuit against her HOA for wrongful eviction. But not just any lawsuit, she was representing herself. She had subpoenaed 2 board members and filed 20+ complaints. These men were her neighbors, delivering cease and desist letters in person because she'd been using their names in flyers and group emails calling them slumlords in polos. I watched an entire legal argument unfold over carbonara and Chianti. Later, as I helped clean up, she asked if I thought her cross-examination outline was too aggressive. I liked her passion, but I wasn't about to be collateral damage in condo court. Story 34. He said he wanted to show me something fun and nostalgic for our second date, so we ended up at a roller skating rink. Cute, right? About an hour in, he got a little too bold with a spin move, fell, and twisted his ankle. Hard. Staff helped him off the floor. A medic checked him. He was fine. Sore, but fine. We were about to leave when he suddenly refused to get up and started loudly talking about liability. I thought he was kidding, until he pulled a small notepad out of his jacket pocket and started taking witness statements. Within 5 minutes, he told the manager, "This floor has uneven traction, and I have every right to pursue legal action." I asked, "Wait, are you suing them?" He said, "I don't sue people. I negotiate settlements." He was a serial slip-and-fall plaintiff. That was his thing. Looked for minor injuries in public places, made big noise, then got settlement checks. I left before he could ask me to sign a statement. Story 35. She said she had something cool and random planned. We met at a courthouse. Not for a date inside, but for what she called jury duty cosplay. I thought it was a weird joke. It wasn't. She explained that she liked sitting in on public trials. Said it was free drama. And better than Netflix. I sat through 3 hours of a civil case about a botched home renovation while she whispered legal commentary in my ear like it was sports. Then, during recess, she casually pointed at the plaintiff and said, "That's my ex's contractor. He ruined our kitchen." I testified last year. I was on a date with a courtroom hobbyist who had a vendetta against a tile guy. We got coffee after, and she asked if I wanted to come back next week for a custody battle between two chiropractors. I respectfully declined, but I still kinda admire the energy. Story 36. We were grabbing drinks at this rooftop bar. First date, casual vibe. She was funny, great smile, and the kind of person who ordered cocktails like she knew exactly what she was doing. We were mid-laugh when two men in suits walked up to our table and asked for her by full name. Her expression changed immediately. They served her with papers, said she was being subpoenaed for a deposition in a class action lawsuit involving the company she used to work for. She had been a mid-level marketing exec for a skincare brand and apparently was on internal emails about misleading product claims. She stared at the envelope, sighed, and said, "This is why I hate rooftops. Now everyone knows." Then she turned back to me and said, "Anyway, you were saying something about your dog?" We finished the drinks, respectfully, but my brain was in absolute chaos the whole time. Story 37. She was gorgeous. Tall, poised, had this lawyer in a movie vibe. She picked the place. An upscale sushi spot with soft jazz and $12 edamame. Over miso soup, she told me she was in law school. During the second course, she admitted she had taken a break from law school. By dessert, she confessed she had been expelled. Why? Well, she hacked into a classmate's email during finals week. She claimed it was to expose cheating, but the school didn't buy it, especially after finding the email with her IP address. She was facing criminal charges for unauthorized access to a computer system and a civil suit for damages. She finished her matcha ice cream and said, "Honestly, I think I'd make a better defense attorney than student anyway." We split the check. I backed slowly into the night. Somewhere, someone's writing her Netflix pilot. Story 38. Met him at a farmer's market. Seemed sweet, kinda nerdy, told me he worked in logistics. Our first date was breakfast for dinner at a diner. Total comfort food vibes. But halfway through pancakes, a woman walked in, stared at us and said, "That's the guy." She was with a sheriff. He stood up calmly and said, "I wondered when this would catch up to me." Turns out, he was evading a small claims judgment. He had been sued by a former roommate for damages after allegedly subletting their shared apartment without permission and ghosting the lease. She had tracked him down through social media and served him right at our booth. The sheriff apologized to me before they walked him out. He messaged me later that night. "Still had a good time if you did." You know what? The pancakes were good. Story 39. We matched on a book club app. First date was at a poetry reading. I was honestly kind of enchanted. She quoted Audre Lorde and had an old film camera. Afterward, we went to a nearby bar. Chill, dim lighting, deep talks. Then she got a phone call, stepped outside, and didn't come back. 10 minutes later, a man approached me and said, "You've been with her all night?" I said yes, confused. He pulled out a badge. She was being investigated for witness tampering. Apparently, her brother was on trial for assault, and she'd been accused of intimidating one of the witnesses involved, anonymously contacting them, sending vague threats. The officer was there to observe and confirm her whereabouts. I had unknowingly just provided her alibi. 2 days later, I was contacted by a defense attorney asking me to verify the timeline. I deleted the app. I still have the Polaroid she took of me that night. I look confused. For good reason. Story 40. This was the most unexpected one. He invited me to a cooking class. Fun, hands-on, felt like a rom-com montage. He was charming, clearly into me, and good with a knife in a non-scary way. At the end of class, we walked out into the parking lot, and that's when a woman started yelling from across the street. "Is that your new girlfriend?" She charged over, turns out his ex-wife. She was in the middle of suing him for hidden assets during their divorce, and had just subpoenaed a financial record that showed he'd made several luxury purchases he hadn't disclosed. Guess what was one of those purchases? The cooking class package. She was using our date to show he was hiding money. He started yelling, she started recording, I just got in my car and left. I still can't make risotto without hearing distant legal threats. Story 41. We went on a dog park date. Simple, sunny, and cute. He brought his golden retriever, I brought my mutt, and we chatted while the dogs ran around. Halfway through the date, a woman stormed up to us and screamed, "You brought my dog on a date?" Turns out the golden wasn't his dog. It was his ex-girlfriend's, and he had taken it during a custody misunderstanding. She was filing for emergency possession and brought printed court documents right to the park. I stood there, holding a leash, while two grown adults argued over visitation rights like we were in a literal pet divorce. She called animal control. He tried to play it cool and kept saying, She's being dramatic. You know what wasn't dramatic? Me walking away with my dog and blocking him before I got subpoenaed to testify over elaborate. Story 42. We'd been texting for weeks. Real slow burn, good vibes. He finally invited me to dinner at his place. Homemade paella, candles, jazz in the background. Felt like an indie movie. Halfway through dinner, a knock at the door. He opens it and 3 people walk in. 2 men, 1 woman. They announce they're there to repossess everything. Apparently, he had defaulted on a civil judgment from a lawsuit with his former business partner, and the court had granted a property seizure order. These people weren't playing. They started tagging furniture, speakers, even the damn paella pan. He looked at me with this sheepish expression and said, "I was hoping they'd come tomorrow." I said, "You were hoping the repo squad would come tomorrow?" Left without dessert. He texted me later that night. "So, rain check?" I didn't reply, but I still think about that paella. It really was excellent. Story 43. He picked me up in a Tesla. First red flag. He made sure to mention it was a leased Model X twice. Dinner was fine. A little braggy, but whatever. But then, as we were walking out, a woman ran up to him, slapped him, and shouted, "That's the watch!" It escalated fast. She accused him of wearing stolen property, a Rolex she claimed was taken during a home burglary. I thought it was a misunderstanding until she pulled out a police report with photos. The serial number matched. He tried to say it was a gift from a client. The police were called. I watched him get handcuffed next to a valet stand. I had to give a statement. Turns out he'd bought the watch off a sketchy auction site he knew dealt in stolen goods. A week later, his lawyer messaged me, asking if I'd testify to his lack of criminal intent. I respectfully declined and suggested they also subpoena his ego. Story 44. She invited me to a rooftop bar for our first date, said she wanted a view and an honest conversation. We ordered drinks. Everything felt normal. Then she leaned in and said, "Okay, I need to come clean." She told me she wasn't single. She was in the middle of a divorce, and things had recently turned ugly. Her husband had filed an emergency motion accusing her of abandonment and requesting full custody of their kids. Then she pulled out her phone and showed me a picture of us, taken from across the bar. "He hired a PI," she said. "That's how I know this might come up in court." I sat there, stunned, trying to figure out if I was dating someone or testifying on their behalf. Later that night, she texted, "If you get served anything, just say we were friends catching up." I blocked the number. Ain't no way I'm entering a custody battle I met on Bumble. Story 45. This one started romantic, like fairy tale level sweet. We went to a local fair. Cotton candy, Ferris wheel, the whole. He won me a giant stuffed sloth at a ring toss booth. I was this close to catching feelings. Then we sat down for funnel cake, and he casually said, "I've been meaning to ask, would you be willing to vouch for my character in court?" I laughed. He didn't. Turns out, he was being charged with public mischief, allegedly making false 911 calls against a neighbor he was feuding with. His defense? That he was mentally sound and had a peaceful social life. He wanted me, a woman he had known for 2 hours, to help prove it. I slowly slid my plate away and said, "I think I left my phone in the bumper cars. Still have that sloth. It lives in my closet and I whisper to it sometimes." We survived the subpoena date together. Story 46. He took me to a jazz lounge. Classy, low lighting, candles, the whole smooth operator vibe. Said he worked in real estate but had recently transitioned to independent projects. Midway through our second drink, a sharply dressed woman marched up to our table and dropped a manila envelope between us. "You've been served," she said, and walked off like it was a mic drop. He sighed and said, "It's just a misunderstanding." Narrator. It was not. He was being sued for fraudulently flipping homes he didn't legally own. Apparently, he created fake deeds using online templates and sold them to investors who didn't realize the properties weren't actually his to sell. I found out later this was his third lawsuit. He even made local news. I showed up for a date and left with secondhand white-collar crime exposure. Bonus. He tried to follow up a week later with, "Still up for that weekend trip, number?" No, I am not. Story 47. Our first date was at an escape room. Super fun idea. Puzzles, teamwork, icebreaker moments. But halfway through, the guy working the front desk came in and told my date he had a phone call. Weird, but okay. My date left and didn't come back for 20 minutes. When he finally did, he looked pale. I asked if everything was okay. He said, "So, I might have to reschedule the second date." He'd just been informed that the judge on his probation case had issued a bench. Apparently, he missed a mandatory court-ordered therapy session and was now in violation. I thought he meant traffic court or something light, but no. He had a domestic violence charge from a previous relationship. He apologized profusely and asked if I wanted to grab dinner, before things got complicated. I hit the exit like I'd solved the escape room myself. Story 48. She was magnetic, witty, beautiful, the kind of energy that makes the whole restaurant feel brighter. First date, steakhouse downtown, total movie scene setup. Everything was perfect until dessert. She excused herself for the bathroom and didn't come back. 10 minutes later, our waitress came over and asked if I was okay. I said yes, just waiting. She then gently informed me that the woman I was with had dined and dashed 3 separate times at that same restaurant. They showed me security footage. Same woman, same pattern. Turns out she was under investigation for small-time fraud, hopping from high-end restaurants, using dating apps to create cover stories, and disappearing once the bill came. I was never charged or anything. The manager said it wasn't my fault, but I did get a call from a local investigator asking if I could ID her from a photo lineup. All I wanted was creme brulee. Got criminal deposition instead. Story 49. It was supposed to be a picnic date. She brought homemade sandwiches. I brought a Bluetooth speaker and lemonade. We were in the middle of talking about travel when a drone flew over us and hovered for way too long. She looked up and muttered, "He found me." Her ex was using a drone to track her. They were in the middle of a restraining order battle. Both had filed against each other, and she suspected he'd been trying to gather video evidence that she was violating terms. She picked up the drone with a stick, threw a blanket over it, and said, "Guess I'll be filing another affidavit Monday." I just sat there holding a turkey sandwich and trying to understand how this turned into aerial surveillance over potato salad. We didn't go on a second date, not because I was scared of her, but because I was scared of the guy flying drones like a villain in a courtroom episode of Black Mirror. Story 50. We met through friends. First date was a small art gallery exhibit, then drinks at a cozy bar. He was soft-spoken, thoughtful, and really into philosophy. Toward the end of the night, I mentioned how refreshing it was to meet someone with no drama. He smiled and said, "Well, almost none." I raised an eyebrow. He told me he was currently suing his therapist. Apparently, during a session, she suggested he journal about his frustrations. He did, and that journal was later leaked in his ex's custody trial. Turns out the therapist had been subpoenaed and gave up the journal without his consent. He was now suing for emotional distress, breach of confidentiality, and damages, and representing himself. He pulled a printout of the complaint from his bag and said, "You're smart. Would love your opinion on my arguments." I left before I became Exhibit C. Story 51. She was sweet, quirky, and had this chaotic artist energy that made everything feel spontaneous. Our first date was at a paint and sip studio, and we genuinely had a great time. Afterward, we walked to a nearby bar, and she spotted a flyer taped to a light pole. She froze. I asked if everything was okay. She said, "Oh my God, they actually did it." It was a public notice for a lawsuit. Her landlord was suing her and 3 other tenants for defamation. Why? Because they started a TikTok account exposing unsafe conditions in the building. It went viral, like hundreds of thousands of views. Turns out the video included footage from inside the landlord's office that she filmed without permission. Now he was suing her for defamation, trespassing, and emotional distress. She pulled out her phone and showed me her court response. Like, "On the date, over cocktails. I think I'll win, though. Want to come to the hearing?" I never called her back. But I followed the case on TikTok. She's got 84,000 followers now and a podcast. Story 52. He invited me to a poker night with his friends. Kind of unconventional for a first date, but I was down. Good energy, relaxed vibe. Halfway through the night, a guy knocked on the door. Not part of the group. Looked serious. Said he was there to talk about business. What followed was a full-blown shouting match in the hallway. I didn't know the full story until after I left, but the guy who showed up was a former client. Because my date wasn't just some casual finance guy. He'd been running an unlicensed investment scheme, not quite a Ponzi scheme, but close, and was being sued in small claims court by several people. The poker night? A cover. He'd apparently been rotating social events through different homes to avoid process servers. Guess he wasn't bluffing, just hiding from being served. I checked Venmo the next morning. He'd charged me $40 for drinks and snacks. Bro tried to bill me for his decoy party. Story 53. It was a beach date. We brought blankets, snacks, and wine. Very mellow. We talked about travel, childhood dreams, and embarrassing teen phases. Then she said, "Okay, I have to tell you something before this goes any further." She admitted she was technically married, but she said it was only for immigration purposes. Her husband was a friend who needed a green card, and they were doing it as a favor. I was stunned. She swore it wasn't romantic, just transactional. But now, she said, things had gotten messy because she was being investigated for marriage fraud, and she needed to prove that the relationship was real, which meant her lawyer suggested she find someone to testify they didn't date during the marriage window. Her plan? Ask me, a first date? To say we'd only just met, in case they checked. She called it a harmless cover story. I called it a federal offense in the making. Blocked. Immediate. Story 54. He was a barista at my favorite coffee shop. We'd been flirting for months, and when he finally asked me out, I said yes without hesitation. We went to a dive bar, had cheap beer and pool, and honestly, it was the best I'd felt in a while, until I noticed his hand kept twitching toward his phone. Eventually, he said, I should probably tell you what's happening, since it might go public soon. Turns out, the cafe we met at, he was blowing the whistle on the owner, who'd been pocketing staff tips, misclassifying workers, and committing tax fraud. He'd gathered evidence and turned it over to the state labor. He was scheduled to testify in the case. He looked me in the eye and said, if anyone asks, we've known each other for longer. It'll make it seem like I wasn't influenced recently. I said, you're asking me to retroactively join your whistleblower narrative? He smiled. Only if you're comfortable. I finished my drink, tipped the bartender, and left. I haven't been back to that cafe since. Story 55. This one is still hard to believe. I met him through mutual friends. He was charming, made good eye contact, and smelled like expensive soap. First date was a rooftop brunch. Classy, sunny, perfect. About 20 minutes in, we noticed a woman sitting at a nearby table glaring at us. He visibly tensed up. I asked if he knew her. He said, sort of. Then she walked over, opened her purse, and threw a stack of papers onto the table. She yelled, I told you I'd find you. Everyone stared. She was his ex. Not an ex-girlfriend, but an ex-business partner. She was suing him for breach of fiduciary duty. Allegedly, he siphoned funds out of their shared event planning company and used it to fund lavish dates with strangers. Strangers like me, the stack of papers, screenshots, transaction records, and a printed photo of him and me from my Instagram story that I hadn't even posted publicly yet. He'd taken a screenshot when I showed him the draft. I never said a word. I left my mimosa and walked straight to the elevator. Later that day, I made my profile private. Lesson learned.